Kenai. We're here today via a new platform. We're not in person for the first time ever. This is a new experience for all of us, but we're really excited to have Justin Pendergrass on the show with us today. Justin, how's it going, man?
Yeah, it's going really well, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. We're super excited. So I actually Koebryn and I met Justin at a recovery rally that you were performing at in Anchorage like a couple years ago or a year ago. And for like the last 2 years, we've been trying a couple times to get on the show, and it hasn't quite worked out. And so now we finally got it. And we're all really excited. But yeah, so I'll kind of start with our usual opening question here. And so kind of take us back to couple months, 6 months to before you got into recovery, and kind of tell us about what spurred your decision to get into recovery.
Yeah. Let's see. I was probably 23 years old. And I was living in an apartment with my wife, my newly wed wife, probably 2 years in. I had a 4-year-old daughter, and I was really struggling with just finding my place and my purpose. And, the drugs were helping me to numb like the mental health struggles that I was having and all the battles that I was running into. Stuff that I didn't feel like music was actually helping with at the time. So I spiraled into my drug addictions, kind of dabbling in a little bit of everything. Never like meth, heroin, or anything like that, but I really liked pills. I really liked drinking, smoked a lot of weed, and it didn't really help because I was working at Fred Meyer's at the time in the liquor department. So everything was just easily accessed. It was okay for me to just get off of work and buy a 6-pack and then go home and down it by myself.
Right. And totally normal too in your cultural context,
Of course.
You work hard, come home, have a beer, 2, 6, nobody really thinks twice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cheers.
But yeah, it just it actually was this lady that I worked with that I couldn't stand. That kind of like took the shift for me. I was in there, I was working, and it was a long, hard day. It was tourist season. Everybody's running through there. The lines were always like 30 people long. Customers are mean because if they didn't have their ID, I'd have to tell them, no, I can't serve you. Like, you can't have any liquor. And they'd be mad. They're like, I'm easily 60 years old. Why can't you give me give me my liquor? And I'm like, man, I can. It's the law. I'm not allowed to give you nothing without your ID. So, so like people were like yelling in my face, and it was just getting to me. And then I go on, and the lines were finally short enough for me to finally get a break. So I go on my 15, use the restroom, grab something to snack on real quick, and I come back probably 3 or 4 minutes early from my break, and this lady that I'm working with comes up to me and starts yelling at me. Where were you? I needed your help. It was crazy in here. And I just looked at her, and I just like set my apron down on the counter, and I walked out. I was done. My plan was to go home and just, drink away my sorrows and just, be done with it all. But my car broke down on my way home. So I didn't really have any direction or any like, what am I going to do now? Right. Like my wife and I were on the fritz, like we were fighting all the time. It was not a fun environment at home. I was probably talking to too many other people, trying to find that acceptance in other people rather than in my wife. And, I woke up the next morning after, doing exactly what I said I was going to do when I got home, being mad about it all. And, I applied for jobs for a couple of days, and nothing was coming up. And, I decided, I'm going to go back to school. I'm still fighting with my addictions in the middle of it. And I had no idea what I was going to do. We ended up shortly after that losing our apartment. I had to move in with my in-laws. And there was nowhere for me to actually use when I was living there. So like so I'm like, I'm living in this house where I can't go and cope the way that I normally cope. So I'm just angry all the time. And I started going to church with them again, and then I got re-engaged with Christ. Had a real spiritual awakening, you know. Ended up focusing all my time on my school. Didn't have time to get high, didn't have time to get drunk or anything like that because I was too busy with college. And you know, I was going to church whenever I had free time. I was working a full-time job, you know, trying to be a dad too, and I ran out of time to do drugs. And
Right.
so I kind of just fell in it like that, guys. You know, I didn't go to treatment. I didn't find any like person to mentor me or anything like that yet. It was just God. You know, I started going to church. I started, you know, leaning into Christ and seeing what it is that He could do for me, and really what He has done for me.
Do you think school? Do you think like just having school and like some structure outside of like a 9 to 5 kind of helped to like engage you in that new sense of purpose and like the kind of what you've been looking for, you know, just a place for you and a sense of purpose as to like kind of what you were doing. Do you think school played a part in that?
Absolutely. It became that like the goal, right? It gave me something to work for that wasn't for someone else. It was directly for me. And, you know, it really created this paradigm shift in my life where it was like, hey, Justin, you could do something other than just, you know, sit on your butt.
So kind of help re-engage your sense of self-worth a little bit and like kind of
really
just gave you a sense of a goal and an ends to something, you know, because I think that's hard with people like when they get into early recovery is like finding, well, I guess when you get past the first like year or two of early recovery, you know, when recovery is the purpose, when you get into early recovery, especially a lot of the people that we talk to that go through like a traditional 12-step program, like you get out and like that's the purpose now, right? Is to like be in recovery, especially in early recovery and like recover. And then you get 2-3 years down the road. And I think our friend that we talk to on here quite often, his name's Zach, has mentioned this a couple of times, you know, and then it's like, after that, what do? You know, you find a job, you have to find something more that gives you that new sense of driven purpose and like something, whether it is, you know, like you said, church, school, but something where there's other people and that's outside of yourself. That's like, you can contribute to something that kind of gives you that sense of purpose and self-worth that like, I think a lot of people use whatever kind of vices you want to use, you know, for people like you and I, it's alcohol or drugs or something like that to fill that kind of that void that's left with this like sense of wandering. But I think like in general, that's like a life thing, you know, is like finding a place or something that you can really like find a sense of purpose in is like one of those like general goals of life, you know, for everybody. Which I think that's just kind of a cool thing that I'm in college too. So it's like kind of like a reinvigorating thing to hear, I guess. So I'm a little biased, obviously, but yeah, I kind of had a similar experience. I had a similar experience, man. Yeah. I mean, before I moved here, I wasn't in school and I was kind of just building houses, you know, and like, it was kind of a cool thing, but it was like, you know, living for the weekends, like, yeah.
I was building houses when I went back to school.
Yeah. Me too.
I get it, man. I get it. It gave me that sense of belonging somewhere, you know. I met a lot of really cool people. I do not use my degree. It gave me confidence, but I don't use it. It's honestly, I feel like I wasted a lot of my time, but if anything did good come out of it, I did get clean from the really hard stuff that I was fighting, you know?
Yeah. And hey, I just want to rewind a little bit and kind of get an idea of what exactly happened. Because, man, from what it sounds like, there was a point where you're basically, you know, all your vices are gone. You're forced to live with your in-laws and you're trapped and basically angry. And then it just like kind of 180s, you know? I mean, it's not that easy. It's not like you flipped a switch and just, oh man, everything's good now. But like, what was it that turned that around? Like, did your in-laws treat you with a lot of like kindness and forgiveness? Because I imagine you weren't the most fun person to hang out with at that point. Like, if I'm trapped and I can't go anywhere and I don't have my vices, I'm upset. I'm very upset all the time, basically. So how did that work?
So, actually a couple things. I went to my father-in-law and I was like, hey man, I'm struggling with these things. And then he he doesn't understand. He was never that person. So rather than like loving on me and trying to help me, he was like, if I ever hear about you doing this again, I'll take your family. And to me, that's like, right, like full on, like, yeah, it was pretty intense. So him and I got into it a lot. Like, there was no support from his side of the fence, you know, and I'll get into more of that, like, and the reasons behind that later. But yeah, so it's odd. I was working construction. I finished up school like while I was still living with my in-laws. I ended up getting my associates in business management because I was like, yeah, I could use that anywhere. But honestly, everybody has a business degree and nobody knows how to use it. So yeah, I was like, yeah, I could use that anywhere. It was a good idea at the time. I do feel like I didn't learn anything in school. Living with them. Okay, so sorry, I'm going off.
No, you're good.
I'm going off on a little rabbit trail here, but living with them, it was good for me to live with them. There was a lot of structure in their home. They always ate at the dinner table. You know, it was always around 6 every Thursday night. They had worship practice. I was working on the sound team, trying to do that. Like I filled my schedule. There was no time for you to get high if you didn't have any time by yourself. So, so school, work, all that, and you know, I would lose jobs still. I was still losing jobs because I was still angry. I was still, you know, I was coming down a lot, like still. And you know, for those of us who don't understand it, is, you know, it takes like 3 or 4 years after you stop using for your mind to fully start developing and re-healing, you know, and for your mind to start functioning at the level it's supposed to. It can take anywhere between 3 and 5 years. So I was still acting like a 17-year-old nincompoop, you know. I'm trying to be appropriate. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Hey, no, I like that word.
No, I can appreciate any good use of the word nincompoop for sure.
Oh, perfect,
that's just good language skills. You don't apologize for that.
You went to college. You gotta show that, man.
You got a degree, man. You can use nincompoop as much as you want.
You spent 2 years longer.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, you know, my wife's mother is actually a teacher, so she helped me through my math classes and things like that. It was really cool.
Right.
So,
and is that something? This is just a curiosity, I guess. We'll kind of jump back, and we're going to jump back to where you are in the story now. Was that something that was in your household as a child, like that kind of structure and eating at the dinner table and those kinds of things?
Oh no, man. Never. I don't actually remember. I don't think I recall ever sitting around the table except for during holidays.
Right.
It was always in front of the TV, or you know, we'd fix it ourselves and eat in our rooms. I mean, as far back as I can remember.
Right.
So I mean, even now, like as an adult, like in my own home, it's odd for me to sit around the dinner table.
Right.
Like I'm almost uncomfortable about it.
Yeah. And I mean, probably like, I'm sure it was like really kind of weird and new. And honestly, maybe a little bit like at first, probably like almost an affront, you know, like what are we doing here? Like, why can't I just
like what was this white family vibes going on here? Like,
right.
I grew up in like this trailer where like the wind blew and the house would shake, and now you guys are in like these suburbs looking homes and stuff. I definitely married up. As far as like social status goes,
right.
My wife's family is very middle class, upper middle class, and I was very like, hey, my brother is now grown out of those pants. I guess I get to wear them now. You know?
Yeah. No, definitely. That's something I can appreciate for sure. 100%. Yeah, no, that's an interesting thing, man, because like eating around the dinner table, from what I like read and kind of understand, is one of those weird like things that's actually really important for like families and structures. And you can actually kind of learn a lot about a family dynamic by kind of just asking if they eat at the dinner table or not. Kind of like what the structure looks like and kind of like what the kids' schedule look like, and just kind of some general dynamic things that like center around families being able to come together at one point at night and just talk about their day, you know? Like,
and we started doing that.
Yeah. What was that like as an experience? You know, like when you've been at work all day, you come home to your in-laws house, you sit down, you're eating, and they start asking you what you did today. Kind of
it
what
was weird,
like,
and you just got fired.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was weird. I don't know. I didn't know like how to react. It like made me super uncomfortable. It's like, why do you guys care about me like that?
Yeah.
You know, like you don't know me like that. Like, why do you care?
Mm-hmm.
And because, you know, I had this weird understanding of it. You know, my family, in a sense, kind of like left me out to dry and like left me in the middle of like my own struggles and basically Justin figure them out. But then this random family that, you know, I've known for a few years is like, yeah, join our family, come over for Christmas. Oh, we want to spend time with you every Sunday. Like, I'm not.
You're like,
what do you mean every Sunday? There's only 2 days during the weekend. Come on, you get every one of those.
Every one of those.
It's just, it was odd, you know. And I still struggle with it. I'm still having a hard time like wrapping my head around the idea of like families spend time together on the weekends, like, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that just kind of speaks to how deeply seated some of that stuff is, you know. And then I kind of relating that back to in a more real way, like we talked about before, you know, and we're kind of getting there, I think, slowly but surely, the idea that a lot of your use stem from these untalked about, unaddressed, like mental health challenges that you had been facing.
Right.
And so now you're in a place where like how deeply seated that is. And then you come to a place where people want to like actively help you with something. And you're like, and I think that's why people get confused. I'm going to say this because I'm sure you were at first a little bit apprehensive to, first of all, be helped. And especially by like your in-laws, because there's a lot of social context around like, especially as a male, like things you're supposed to do and provide and all your like societal obligations. And then here you are, struggling 23-year-old, just getting into school for the first time, having structure for the first time, sitting down at the dinner table, all this stuff. And so you're probably a little bit like you said, uncomfortable, maybe abrasive. And I think that's where some people might get the idea that like
kind of a jerk,
you were a little bit ungrateful.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's really like an idea of like you being ungrateful. It's kind of just like you said, like it's so new and it's
like
so uncomfortable. Shock. Yeah, definitely. And so like, what was kind of that dynamic like in that kind of sense? Were there ever any like kind of hangups between like, hey man, Justin, we're helping you out a lot here, dude. Like we kind of need, like, was your obligation just like participate or?
No, I had to clean up and help with the dishes and, you know, around the house and stuff like that. I mowed the lawn, which I absolutely hate. Mowing the lawn sucks. Relatable. I'll be honest. I live in Alaska because I don't want to have to mow the lawn. No, that's.
And you don't 8 months out of the year. It's fantastic.
That's true.
Maybe
then
not.
There's those 4 months out of the year where I look at the lawn and wish somebody else would mow it for me.
That's why you have kids, right?
Yeah.
She's 8, so maybe she could mow the lawn this year. That's true.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
I don't tell her that I said that. You're like, man, I really hate this Koebryn guy. I don't know him.
McKenna, I was on this podcast earlier, and they said,
now
your job. Now your job to mow the lawn.
Yeah. And so what was that kind of like, having that structure, you know, like having to mow the lawn or like, you know, being able to mow the lawn, you know, what were those like, how did you feel going in or like experiencing those aspects of structure as well?
I like
suffering
through maintenance too.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's not something I feel like people in addiction or the times when
they're active addictions.
Yeah. And active addiction really do a lot of self-care and maintenance. It's kind of something that falls by the wayside. So how was that?
Man, I was horrible at that self-care stuff, even in the beginning, like, cause to me, it was like, I need to stay busy all the time. So like doing those chores and stuff was just another thing that kept me busy. And I mean, so I was trying to start a rap career at the time. I was going to college. My daughter was probably 4, so learning how to deal with a toddler that is now talking to me. You know, taking care of whatever other needs that my in-laws need for me to do at the house. Restoring my marriage because it was destroyed in that time from, you know, my neglect on my wife and what I was doing in secret. It was I didn't have time to really I didn't even realize that I was working through these steps of recovery
Mm-hmm.
and making amends in these places. It just kind of happened,
Right.
as I went through. And then when I finally read the 12 steps, probably almost 3 years into my sobriety and my recovery, I was almost 3 years in, and I read the 12 steps for the first time, and I said, I've already done all of these things, just living my life. I went around and I talked to all the people that I hurt, and I apologized, and I made amends with my family who hurt me, and I started walking in my faith and paying people back that I'd wronged, and without even knowing that those were what I was supposed to be doing to actually find recovery.
So what I'm wondering is, you're working really hard a lot, and I know you don't have like a lot of time for thinking or really to yourself, but what keeps you from being like resentful or even like feeling overwhelmed? Or because starting new habits is a lot of work because you don't see the results. You haven't seen how your life's going to be in maybe 2 years when things have turned around a bit. I mean, at some point you're just working really hard and you're suffering because you don't have your vices. So what keeps you going in that time? Like, do you reach out to someone, or how does that work?
Man, it was God, and it was music. And I'm telling you
Mm-hmm.
that I cannot preach enough that God came in there and he provided every means and need for me to be able to move forward to the next step. And it was a slow, painful process, but every single second of my life matters today. Every single struggle that I went through my life matters today, after knowing really where it is that God was trying to lead me and guide me to. I tell people this all the time, just because you were in these struggles doesn't mean that you don't have a purpose or a plan. He's going to take these things that you've done in your life. Welcome to training. Life is going to hit you in the face. You're going to get trained through all these things, whether you make mistakes or not. You're going to learn something. And then when I finally found my recovery and started working through my mental health and healing, I started to realize just the amount of strength and power that I was given through my life.
And so when you started working through some of your mental health challenges, I know we haven't gotten anything specifically, and maybe this will be an avenue towards that. Did you use any resources, or what were kind of some strategies that you used to start? What was your experience like, even just getting to address those questions? Because I feel like that's like one of the hardest steps is the first step. It's almost kind of like a floodgate to where the hardest thing is to open it up. And then once you get opened up a little bit, it's a little easier to start practice that concept of sharing and being a little more open and vulnerable. Did you use any resources to kind of get that ball rolling?
For me to be able to share with others?
Yeah, and just in general, and just to start addressing some of that tougher mental health stuff.
So at the beginning of it all, I'd already been, before, I'd started trying to get sober, I'd already had been working on my mental health stuff with a few people. And I'd been given a couple opportunities to be able to write these songs for suicide prevention through the state. And
cool.
Because that's something that I struggled with. People had heard that I was a rapper, and they're like, hey, do this. And I was like, okay. Mm-hmm. And so I already had been trying to focus on those things and
Right.
really heal from all that stuff, even before I decided to stop using.
Okay.
So it doesn't, you don't just wake up and be like, hey, I'm not going to use anymore, and now I'm going to focus on my mental health. For me, it was, I know that there's a problem because I want to kill myself.
Right.
I know there's a problem.
So how did you get to, so even before you stopped using, even before that, so how'd you get access to the people that you were talking to at that time that were like, hey, these are some things that we want you to do, or these are some things that you look to be struggling with? Kind of what was that process like?
So you guys grew up here in Alaska, right? Or
Koebryn
so
did, yeah.
So you know how small it is of a community.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I was born here, raised here, never really left here. And I met a guidance counselor in the 8th grade, and he kind of just followed me through my high school years. And he'd always been somebody who I could reach out to and talk to. His name was Harold Henderson. And he kind of like followed me through this process. And even as a man today, he reaches out to me and we talk, and he helps me through stuff as I'm just battling things still. But that guy never gave up on me. He was that father figure that I needed when I didn't have one at the time. And so I'm trying to think of how I want to word this for you, because it's such a broad question.
Yeah, definitely.
How did I start working through my mental health? I mean, I never stopped working through my mental health. It was my whole life. Every time that I would have a lapse in like my suicidal thoughts and ideations, I would grow through it and then move on and be better. And then I would stumble and I would grow through that and I would move on and be better. And then, so on and so forth. But it was this guy who stayed consistent in my life, and he mentored me and he kind of guided me where I needed to be and where I was going. And he saw the potential in me. He got me my first job. He bought me my work boots so I could go to my first job. He got me my first music gig for me to be able to do this huge, like, suicide prevention campaign with my rap songs. And he was always pushing me towards something and some sort of goal that I knew I wanted, but I didn't know what it looked like. And he could see it because he could see from the outside perspective of me and kind of help guide me that way. And, once I found Christ, I feel like Christ did that for me in an even bigger way, where he started to guide me in other directions and be like, hey, those are the things I needed to learn over there. Let's go over here so we can learn these things. And it helped me to understand not only my own mental health struggles, but helped me to understand that, like, even when I am struggling, there is a purpose in it. And there's something on the other side of that I can gain some real knowledge from and keep growing through things. I hope that makes sense, because I feel
no,
like
it totally does. No, that answers my question actually really well. It seems like this guidance counselor, and that sounds kind of like a pejorative way to say that. That's not. It wasn't. It wasn't intended.
What does pejorative meaning?
Just kind of like, like this guy, kind of ambivalent, kind of just like.
Oh, okay.
Something's pejorative. It's just like a little bit condescending, but a little bit ambivalent at the same time. You know what I'm saying?
And
ambivalent just means like you don't care.
Oh, okay.
Like they're just whatever. If someone's ambivalent towards your struggles, they'll mention it, but they don't really like.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of empty.
Gotcha.
Their response is empty, and they're ambivalent.
See, Aaron's using his college degree. He doesn't have it yet.
But anyway, and so it seems like your guidance counselor was kind of the guy that took like a vested interest in your life, kind of that mentor that you really, like you said, that you really needed, so that kind of answered my question. I feel like it's so important for people to hear, man, because I think like when we think about schools don't need counselors, or like we don't need to pay our taxes, or like all these other things, and like how important those people are to like to people like you, man. Like, like not to say that your faith wouldn't have picked you up at one point or another, because I can't say that for sure, obviously, but like I don't want to undermine in any way, shape, or form how crucial it sounds like this guy was to your life, and how crucial that a lot of these like leaders that aren't in typical leadership positions, like guidance counselors in general, anybody that's like a safe person to talk to for somebody that's struggling, are so important to like so many people. So it answered my question in that sense for sure. Like I think that's kind of the answer, is you got a really cool guidance counselor that was like, hey man, like you have a lot of potential, you have purpose, kind of the things you're doing now for kids, right? Isn't that part of your job?
It is, actually. It is what I do for a living now.
Yeah. So what is your job, and as much as you can kind of say about that?
I can share anything and everything. My boss would not be upset at all. I can't give you names of my clients, of course, but I can share what we do. Yeah, I'm a suicide prevention specialist. That's what my main title is, but I also operate as a case manager, and I run 3 sober living homes for men. I've been there for almost 3 years, actually. And before that, I was working in recovery service for an organization called True North Recovery, where we operated as peer support. And before that, I was just, coming out of my addiction, finishing college, and I was working in a warehouse. So just within the last 4 years, I've really taken my life and shifted it to a completely different field. I went from working as a carpenter to now working in behavioral health.
Mm-hmm. That's super cool.
It's so interesting looking at your story as far as we've gotten it, and how much it like relates to recovery, but in a really organic fashion, in the sense like your guidance counselor was kind of like an accountability partner, and you not having time to invest in any of your vices is kind of like the phrase in recovery of building a life for yourself that you wouldn't be able to maintain if you had substances in it. You
Right.
know, like, and seeing that, it's interesting that you found that path that a lot of people had to go a different way through, but it's a similar story.
There's some universalities for sure.
I
I think like that's.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, you go ahead.
I just think it's all deeply rooted in that mental health, and really the traumas and the things that we experience as young people that really lead us down these darker paths that sometimes, result in the drug use, or even worse than the drug use, the other things that you'd run across, or the things that you'd be shown along the way. So I do see the relevance I see myself relating with, even the both of you in things that I've heard from you. So I think that's important.
Definitely. And it sounds like your childhood wasn't necessarily super great as far as structure and care goes. So that is a good thing to bring up, these adverse childhood experiences that a lot of people go through that we don't really talk to anyone about, and you never know what kind of needs are created by not receiving that kind of care when you're young that you don't realize you have when you're an adult. And
I had a question, and just kind of for our general listeners. Actually, we don't know all the demographics of our listeners, obviously, but typically I don't think they're kids. Sometimes I would hope not, I guess. But so even whether it's kids or parents, I guess we'll start with this. If you had to give a piece of advice or two, or maybe just something for parents whose child may not necessarily be struggling with substance use, but just with some of the mental health challenges, suicidal thoughts and ideations, general depression, anxiety, all those different kinds of things, all in different disorders. What kind of advice might you have for parents of a kid who's going through that?
I get those questions all the time, actually. Parents will come in and they'll be like, what do I do? What do I do? My son, my daughter, they're cutting their wrists. They're talking about ending their life. When both of those are very big shockers to someone who loves someone else, but just to take some things and put it into perspective for you, just because I'm scarring myself does not mean that I want to end my life. It means that I'm just trying to feel something other than what I'm feeling inside. Somebody who is, talking about ending their life, they are less likely to end their life. So it is actually a good sign if they mention it to you. That gives you time to intervene. That's them crying out to help. That's important. The thing that I tell parents to the most, though, and I'm a little bit, I'm really blunt. Not a lot of people like me because I am so blunt, but I will be blunt with parents, especially when it comes to a life or death situation with their child. Your job is not to take the power away from your children. Your job is to empower your children. And what that means is that every time that you bring it up, or are like, oh, I got to get all the knives out of the house, or, oh, I got to do this to protect my child. We're not asking for you to protect us. If we're going to do that, we're going to find a way. You're just going to make it a little bit more difficult for us, right? Especially those who are battling with those suicidal thoughts and ideation. You don't want to take away our power because we already feel so powerless. And if you come in and you're like, remove all the knives, remove all the guns, Justin's going to end his life, you've just removed every little bit of power from me that I felt like I had. And then it's a hard pill to swallow. It's hard to understand. But by removing power from me, you're making it worse.
Right.
Don't treat me like I'm somebody who is broken. I am hurting. I'm not different than you, though. I just deal with something different than you. Right? A lot of people think that, suicide is selfish. And you can think that all you want, but do not say it to somebody. Never in your life say suicide is selfish ever again. Actually, I really hate that.
Yeah.
You're telling somebody who already feels like they don't like themselves that they're being selfish, and you're making it worse.
Yeah, it's just confirming what they feel. Right?
Yeah.
You're just confirming it. You're causing more problems on top of it. You're dealing with somebody whose mindset is literally everything sucks so badly that I don't want to live.
Right.
And that means that you have to be very mindful about how you address somebody. With the kids that I work with who are struggling with that, the first thing that I do is I listen to what the heck they got to say, right? Sometimes it takes 30 minutes. Sometimes it takes an hour and a half of them just spilling everything on me. Now, 50% of the time, that's all they needed was somebody to just sit there and listen to them. Some of them are a little bit more severe than that, and you got to work a little bit harder to deal with that. Right? Like, we treat our kids like we're their dictators or their leaders, but we live in this republic mindset of the world, right? That's not what America was built on. But we treat our kids like we're their dictators instead of listening to their emotions and understanding that their feelings matter just as much as mine, right? Oh, my daughter hurt my feelings because she's not doing what I asked, but are you hurting her feelings by yelling in her face after she doesn't do what you asked? Like, there's a difference between like, there's defiant children, but then there's children whose its deeply rooted causes are like the traumas and things that experienced, and you got to get to those, and you got to start chopping at the roots, or they're gonna fall over, or they're not gonna, like, those things aren't gonna be removed from their life. They're gonna fail, and they're gonna end up on these addiction paths. And I have to point all this stuff out to these parents and just be like, look, your kid has every single emotion that you will ever experience. Think about that for a second. Every emotion that you have ever had in your entire life, an 8-year-old can feel. So when your child comes up to you and says, Mom, I want to die, your reaction shouldn't be remove all the knives from the house. Your action should be like, what do I do to help my child today to make sure that they get there tomorrow? Well, that comes with like inviting people to life, right? So I do this thing where like I'll sit down with my clients and I'll talk with them and they'll share with me what's going on, and sometimes I don't have as long as I'd like, but I spend a lot of time having a conversation with them, but I invite them to life. After that, I'll be like, hey, I want to finish this conversation, but I got to go over here and do this thing. And it could be like a misculous thing that doesn't even matter. But I'll be like, why don't you come with me and let's go do this? And then they share with me. And now they're out doing something. They're not sitting in their bed. Right? And then it'd be like, hey, man, I know that you're feeling down and everything, but I got this stuff that I got to do tomorrow. I'd love for you to come with me. Well, now they have a plan for tomorrow. They got to be there. Right? They're going to want to be there.
And I think on another level too, you're offering them something that like, and I think this is another hard part for even just like people who don't necessarily have an understanding of some of these mental illness symptoms, I guess, and even parents, and like, is that, like you said, they're operating from a totally different thought plane than you are, in the sense that it's not like, so I guess here's the thing. When you actively want to die, that flips like the total thought process of every like quote unquote like normal person on its head. Right. In the sense 100%. That like, and so now everything that you think is right, wrong, this or the other has to be, it doesn't necessarily mean it's right or wrong. It has to be reassessed through a totally different lens that you have no experience in. And so I think that's a barrier for some people. But I think to get over that barrier, you have to really, like you said, be mindful and open your mind to the idea that like these are realities. Like these are like these are real. Like, and they're very right here. And I think, in like you said, inviting people to life in that sense, like these are people that's backwards. Like I think a lot of people inherently think we have at least some semblance of worth, whereas people who are really, really struggling with this stuff literally do not think they're worth being invited to run errands, things that are like a lot of people don't even want to do, you know, like
Right.
to do this or to do that.
Just being around them.
Yeah. And
they
just
don't
being,
think people want to be around them at all.
or have companions or friends, you know, they don't think they deserve that or that they're worth that.
It feeds itself.
And I think that's hard for people to really wrap their mind around. And I think that's why people get this misconception of that, like, oh, they lay in their bed all day because they're lazy or because they're antisocial or because they are this or they're that, you know, and like, which you can logically get to from the starting point of I want to survive. But you like it doesn't, you can also logically get there when you really flip that on its head from the standpoint of, man, what if I actively did not care about my life, or like in the sense of, like, of my well-being or my actual being here, you know, like my actual like living.
And it does two things. It creates that understanding that somebody does care about you because they invited you to do something or do anything, right? Like, and I might not even show up, but the fact that you invited me already makes me feel better.
That's a good point.
Right? I might never show up. But now I know that there's somebody out there who is expecting me to show up or wants me to show up, and I don't want to let them down.
Yeah. I mean, everybody wants to feel wanted. I think that's a common human desire, is you want people to want you around.
I think that even more than that, like we want to be needed.
Yeah, even within a family unit, within a community, there's a desire to be a part of something. I think it's easy to lose that desire when you feel like the people around you don't see you as someone worth valuing. Or let me put it a different way. It's hard to reach out to people who feel that way because I think, like Aaron said, they're starting from a different mental perspective. But that invitation is huge for sure.
Yeah.
So exercise and work are two things that you guys can do to fill up your time.
Definitely. I think we hear that a lot, you know, in early recovery, for sure. I think like a lot of people that come into early recovery are like, you get into a few active things that like people really love, and fitness is always one of those things that like people seem to jump on. So I think it's obviously like physiological too, right? Yeah, it's a community. You feel your body feels good afterwards. You start to look better. Your self-esteem starts to kind of fly up. Like overall, in general, I think it's a lot of positive things in that aspect for people who are looking for belonging and purpose, for sure.
Well, thanks again, Justin, for coming on and sharing your story, as well as some great advice on how to help kids out who are dealing with mental struggles. Thanks for listening. This was You and I for the Kenai.